Well, since many in the media really want to pit Ron DeSantis versus Donald Trump. Now, the media wants to do this because they believe two things. Number one, that weakens Trump, it tears apart the MAGA base, ensuring that Trump doesn't get the nomination. And if in the same time that means DeSantis is then weakened, well, so be it, because they're not Ron DeSantis fans. The rhinos are willing to accept a Ron DeSantis because they do understand that the Republican Party, as far as ideology, has truly shifted as a direct result of Donald Trump, thus proving what Lindsey Graham said about Donald Trump.
There are no Trump policies without Donald Trump.
Could any other Republican, in particular the rhinos or the GOP establishment, have gotten the vast majority of conservative Republicans to change their thinking on the military-industrial complex? Now, we were warned about the military-industrial complex, not by a flaming liberal, not by a Democratic president. We were warned about it by literally the hero who organized and engineered what became known as D-Day, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who, when he served as President of the United States, realized that America was in trouble, deep trouble, that war was no longer about defending our liberty. War was about money. It was about making money. It was about ensuring chaos around the world to somehow garner our own stability here. And if young lives, i.e., American soldiers, had to be used as the fodder to ensure the financial advancement of certain individuals and groups within this country, well, then so be it. And Dwight D. Eisenhower tried to warn America of that the night before the good-looking, charismatic John F. Kennedy would take the oath of office as the President of the United States. And sadly, most Americans ignored his speech, didn't watch it, and it wasn't until decades later that some liberals began to re-examine that speech and were like, wow, Ike was on it. He was on it about Vietnam and every war going forward. That said, for years, Republicans, in particular, I'm talking about Republican voters, had this idea that in order to prove that you were patriotic and loved the country, you had to support our military interventions and operations around the world. Now, that began to sour toward the end of Vietnam, but along came CIA President George H.W. Bush, and he gave that patriotism a good shot in the arm when we pushed Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. And then, of course, his son, W., he and Vice President, I should say, war criminal Vice President Dick Cheney, they took war to a whole new elevation. You know, we had to go after the people that brought down the World Trade Center in the wrong countries because we were really going after Saddam Hussein. And we had to continue this war for 20 years. It was Barack Obama who promised to end the war. He didn't. In fact, he droned and killed more people than W did. But it was this upstart, this out of left field, not part of the establishment, Donald J. Trump, who came in and actually thought that he was the commander-in-chief. And he wanted us done with all of this military interventionism around the world, and even threatened to pull out of NATO, and the powers that be couldn't have that. Couldn't have that. So you understand, the ruling establishment, they could care less about what they call the window dressing of a candidate. You know, what his positions are on things like abortion, critical race theory, social this, social that. Don't care. What they care about is we will maintain a surveillance police state. The military-industrial complex drives foreign policy, thus driving the economic engine of this country. We are heading for globalism under the delusion that we'll be in charge of it, bullhawk. And they're already tipping their hand that that's what they're going to make the 2024 election about as they saber rattle with China. And you can't have a Donald Trump in there because he won't protect the interests of the military-industrial complex. So now you understand why there's all this vehement hatred that comes from the political establishment, and their talking pieces in the lying legacy, corporate, corrupt mainstream media fall right in check. And here comes Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. And he is perfect because he has the right social positions and he loves the military-industrial complex. He has been the bait and switch. The ruling class knows that what Biden has done is an unmitigated disaster. They understand they're not going to accept just another, quote, rhino. So here's this guy, Ron DeSantis. And again, he gets credited with leading the charge against the COVID overreaction and mandates in Florida. No. Again, I've said that the people around him moved him to the right. But there's more to it than that. The powers that be behind the scenes looking at Ron DeSantis and believing that he could conceivably become the new face of MAGA, a face that would be friendly to the military-industrial complex, the status quo, and business as usual, but would be able to keep the minions in line over things like, well, we don't really need transgender people coming into our schools and reading to 4-year-olds and trying to groom and indoctrinate them. And those are kind of like win-win things. And so he opened his state when he was in full competition with Gavin Newsom and Cuomo out of New York to see how many lockdowns he could put on the state. And it wasn't until a pastor by the name of Rodney Howard-Browne got arrested on national television and let out of his church because he refused to cancel services and 5,000 people showed up. And his staff said, Mr. Governor, this is not a good look for us, and this is not a good look for you with the Christian right. So he reopened the churches, he reopened the beaches, and the rest is history. But I'm going to say this, the deep state knew from jump that a lot of the COVID overreaction, which is, by the way, now being apologized for by many members of the scientific community, sensing there is a shift in the wind of people, and that they have been doing research, and a lot of the stuff that got labeled as disinformation is now being apologized for by the people who labeled it disinformation. The powers that be knew from jump what the pandemic was about, tanking an economy to get rid of a president, and it was a great way to test the limits of what kind of controls and mandates you could put on people. They too advised the governor how to back things off, open things up, be perceived as the thorn in the flesh to Joe Biden. Thus, they created these wins for Ron DeSantis in Florida to make him the Trojan horse that the MAGA Republicans would accept. It's not any more complicated than that. And if you think that Ron DeSantis, because he doesn't carry, quote, the same baggage and vitriol response from the media that a Donald Trump does, if you think that means he's going to govern like a Donald Trump, if he were to make it to the Oval Office, you are sadly mistaken, and you are delusional. And you drank the Kool-Aid. Now, what do we need to know about Ron DeSantis? Well, he grew up in Florida, graduated from Yale, got his law degree, joined the United States Navy. I have a son in the Navy. He spent 2 years overseas. While he was there, heard that the Naval Academy reserves a few spots every year for active duty Navy personnel that they can achieve a scholarship to. He called me from Spain to let me know, Dad, I'm going to go for it. And he did, and he got it. He spent a year at NAPS, and then it was on to the Naval Academy at Annapolis. Very proud of him. So I'm not discrediting Ron DeSantis' military career. I'm not even insinuating that because he was in the military, that, quote, automatically, puts him in bed with the military-industrial complex. The fact that he became an attorney with JAG and his first assignment was the Joint Task Force at Guantanamo Bay, i.e., Gitmo, there to ensure the rights of, quote, the detainees. In fact, Captain Patrick McCarthy, who supervised DeSantis at Gitmo, said that DeSantis was tasked with ensuring the prisoners were given their rights under the Common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention. DeSantis, quote, made sure detainees were addressed in a way that was consistent with the law. That's good. That's good. Since none of them were ever actually formally charged with anything, there was no law to govern that. Hear the verbal doublespeak? Hear the legalese action? So that means Ron DeSantis oversaw the detainees who were being waterboarded. Ron DeSantis then moved on to the Naval Special Warfare Command, where it was basically his job not just to take care of SEAL Team 1, but to make sure that all of our military officers around the world who would get themselves in hot water by, basically ignoring the laws of the land where they were, it would be Ron DeSantis who would be brought in to make the backroom deal to get them, quote, out of trouble. What I am saying about Ron DeSantis is the fact that he served in the military is not in and of itself meaning that he is part of the military-industrial complex. What I am saying is a guy who graduated from Yale, joined the Navy, quickly climbed ranks, and was constantly being promoted, and was overseas making sure that whatever mischief, whether it be with women or with civilians or with whatever, was dealt with, swept under the rug, vanished, disappeared. A guy who does that is in bed with the military-industrial complex. And more than likely, the initiation into all of that so that you magically get these promotions and get this elevated authority and this prestige and even get things like governorships and maybe even promise the Oval Office. What do they have on Ron DeSantis? Because that's how being in the establishment works. What initiations did he go through? What skull and bones type nonsense is he a part of? Ron DeSantis, though I am very thankful for what happened in Florida, but let's not forget, Donald Trump is not exaggerating when he said we had to drag DeSantis across the finish line. I was on the air in the Orlando radio market when that all went down. I can tell you we dragged him across. He won by 0.4%. He almost lost to a guy by the name of Andrew Gillum, the crack-addicted mayor of Tallahassee, who was under federal indictment at the time, and yet just about beat DeSantis, and who knows, maybe he did. Maybe that election was, helped. Now, of course, Gillum is in prison. So Ron DeSantis is another W, another creation of the deep state. This canvas where you can paint on it any picture of him you want. You can make him a conservative, a MAGA guy, or whatever. When in reality, he's just a deep state Trojan horse. Just like you talk to people about Barack Obama, and depending on who you talk about, you get completely different points of view on him. Because again, he was this blank canvas who was a creation. So is Ron DeSantis. He angers just enough people that it gets the right excited. He, as a governor, is seen in a position of power and authority and gets things done, something that Donald Trump cannot project right now. So that's what you're dealing with Ron DeSantis. You want to get on the Ron train, you want to get behind him, you want to support him, understand you are voting for the establishment. You are voting for the status quo. You are voting for the military-industrial complex, period. They'll throw you a few bones, initially, and then eventually it'll be right back to, quote, business as usual. Bum, ba-dum, bum.